Welcome back to AP World History. Today we are going to begin Unit 2.5, Cultural Consequences. Right, so we're going to be looking at the cultural developments and interactions during this time period. Right, so the goal being to be able to explain the intellectual cultural effects of the various networks of exchange. So it's kind of like a recap day, right? In a lot of ways, we're trying to apply a lot of the things that we've already looked at, right? So this is kind of a good image to start with. The Degener Mosque in Timbuktu, right? And as we discussed this, or as we looked at this in class, right, this is an example of an Andalusian architect, right? So from Al-Andalus, Islamic Spain, right, had been brought down to design this architectural style, and we see it's a syncretism between kind of traditional mud-packed architecture from sub-Saharan West Africa, right, and it creates a very unique and distinctive architectural style that we see throughout the Sundayatan empires, right? So Mali, Songhai, right? We'll see this architectural style used for mosques and mausoleums alike throughout this time period. So when you see this architectural style, then right, this tells us that it's sub-Saharan West Africa. All right, so kind of overview of kind of the cultural exchanges and major developments. And of course, there's a lot, right? So that we've talked about so far between 1200 and 1450, right? So just simply take Islam, right? So during our time period in question, we see the diffusion of Islam via merchant activity into Southeast Asia, right? Down here into Southeast Asia. So by the time we get to 1450, the diasporic Islamic merchant communities are going to be established there, and also into sub-Saharan West Africa, right? And of course, the diffusion of Islam into sub-Saharan West Africa predates Mali, with Ghana, but we see the kind of firm establishment of that, of the upper class, the ruling class, right, and the merchant class in sub-Saharan West Africa, right? So, and of course, that is exemplified by when we looked at with Mansa Musa and his famous Hajj that he takes in 1324. So, and of course, the part of the story from kind of the very end of our period on in sub-Saharan West Africa is also going to be kind of the role of the Sufi missionaries in the process of Islamization within this region. So diffusing Islam, into the rest of the population beyond the ruling class and the merchant class, right? All right, and the same is going to be true in Southeast Asia, right? With that, so Buddhism makes a comeback, right, at the end of our period. Largely due in part to the Mongols, right, and the Mongols' adoption of Buddhism in many places, specifically by Kublai Khan, in the Yuan period, and of course Taoism gets a bit of a boost by Genghis Khan, by being given tax exempt status, in what the formerly the Jin region of northern China, right? And of course, just kind of the other major things that are diffused that are going to have a major impact, in the coming years. So of course, the paper diffusion, right? That's the Battle of Talas in 751. So the diffusion into the West from China of paper is going to take root and going to have major implications to come, specifically in Europe in the mid 1400s. Right, the compass being diffused from China throughout the Indian Ocean Trade Network, or the monsoon marketplace, whatever you want to call it, right? And whatever your creative names were for it. So we're going to see that being diffused into the Mediterranean world as well, right? Once it gets established there. All right. So, and of course, our travelers is one of the things that we're going to look at today. So Marco Polo, Zheng Ha, Ibn Battuta, Marjorie Kemp, who's probably a new name, right? We haven't mentioned her yet, right? And of course, Right? We kind of see the other major religion, Hinduism, there, having been diffused by the kind of the beginning of our course, right? So we see, of course, Angkor Wat in the Khmer Empire, modern day Cambodia, but also Hinduism is well established throughout the Malaccan Straits and Indonesia by this point as well. Right, so that occurs predates our class. So keep in mind this, the diffusion in the economic activity is dependent upon maritime technology that is being adopted everywhere throughout the Indian Ocean world and diffused and being diffused beyond, right, by this point. Right, and of course, don't ever forget the merchant diasporic communities, right? So the Muslim merchant communities, are rising during this time period throughout this region, which is going to have consequences, right, for the future, right, once we get on there. And of course, the Chinese merchant diasporic communities are also very active here as well. But we're not going to see the diffusion or the large spread adoption of Confucianism into this region. But Buddhism is already established. Theravadan Buddhism is largely already established before the time period of our course begins here. Right, we're, of course, when you're talking about Sufi, right, talking about Sufism in helping the spread of Islam, right? So we see an image here depicting dervishes, which is definitely a good example of syncretism between Islam and the more shamanistic practices of the Central Asian steppe, right? So the application of Rumi, in this case here. So Sufism, Sufi Islam, is once again becomes important. Right? And of course, the Mongols' role, right? The Mongols' role in the diffusion of this. So here we are. We have this kind of painting, right, commissioned by Kublai Khan of the Yuan. So we kind of see the syncretism there. So the Chinese garments, right, but a lot of traditional Mongol practices here as well being seen. All right, so for homework, you had an option. You had a couple of options. One is to do a reading, kind of a traditional reading, or to choose one of these two articles, right, the Ibn Battuta or the Zhonghua. And I also made the Marco Polo available to you as well. So if you chose one of those, then we'll kind of talk about that, right? But our travelers at this time, of course, we talked about this in class, Marco Polo, and I mentioned this in class, and I found it, so I figured I'd kind of share this. So here's a copy of Christopher Columbus's Latin edition of the Travels of Marco Polo. Or the description of the world, right? And of course, you can see Christopher Columbus's notes in the margins here, right? So, using this as his guide as he traveled. And once again, Marco Polo, since we talked about him, you can see the route that he took here. So from Venice, right, he's Venetian, and then he makes that overland journey, right, on his way eventually over to the Yuan court of Kublai Khan. And then after his service, I believe it was 17 years, he then escorts one of the daughters and for an arranged marriage over here in the Ilkhanate, right? And then he makes his way back home. All right, so, and of course we see here the effects of these travels, right? So obviously it played a major role in Christopher Columbus and inspiring him, to make his journey, and of course we see maps, right? The maps that'll be used, by cartographers, using the information brought back home from Marco Polo, and you can kind of look at this, and you can definitely see, kind of a wider view of the world here, right? So including the Afro-Eurasia, right? All of Afro-Eurasia here, which is the known world for Europeans at this point, all right? So, and you can definitely see where the gaps are as well, right? So very clear, right? Very modern looking kind of map. Since this is a European map, right? So this part of the world is extremely well known to them, and you can kind of make out some of the, you can see where it gets a little fuzzy, right? So the Red Sea is very clear, the Persian Gulf is very clear, and kind of beyond that, you can definitely tell where their knowledge gaps are. All right, so if you read the Ibn Battuta passage, right, then you can kind of see you can see where he went, kind of the extent of his travels. We've all read a selection from his trip to Mali, but you can also see his travels were extensive, all the way to China. And there's places where he definitely went, and then there's some questionable. Did he actually go to some of these places, right? But yeah, so a great source on what the world was like at this time period. And so here's just some kind of thematic things that we can extract from Ibn Battuta. I would encourage you to take a moment and if you're watching this from home, to pause this video and at least read through this and get some of the kind of thematic information that we extract from Ibn Battuta, right? What we learn from him. All right, the paper trail is kind of a just different visual look at the origins of paper, and then how it gets diffused, right? So you kind of see the spreading of it around China, the diffusion down through Korea, eventually to Japan, and then westward, right? So, kind of the post-Battle of Talas, we see it. We see it coming into Dar al-Islam, and then diffusing its way across Dar al-Islam, right? And then eventually back up into Europe, right? So via Al-Andalus and the Italian city-states into northern Europe, right? All right, so then we can see when it eventually makes its way to Mexico as well, post-European colonization. And of course, paper is kind of a big deal because of the printing press, right? So this is, if you want to talk about the printing press, which is going to become a big thing in the next unit, this is a good little contextual story of the diffusion of paper, and eventually, we need that in order to get this crazy important invention, to make the mass production of books and the such possible, right? And then, of course, we see here a timeline of books and written knowledge, right? So you see the start of woodblock printing by the Chinese, the start of movable type by the Koreans, and then eventually, Gutenberg in what is today Germany, right? And there's debate over whether there's any actual connection between these two things, right? Is there or is there not? And we can see very quickly here, but this is mid-1400s, we see Gutenberg, right, create his first printing press, and then within 50 years of the printing press, we see more than 1,000 active printers, right? So, the mass producing literature is, right, that technology is exploding, really, really fast, all right? And, of course, we get other things, right? So before Gutenberg, right? So we're talking about scriptoriums, right? Is how books would be created, and but you can see here a paper mill town, right? So Nuremberg. You can kind of see where the paper mill is on the outside of the city. If you've ever lived in a mill town before, then you can probably understand why they don't want that in the middle of the city. If you've never lived in a mill town before, then yeah, it has something to do with odors. All right. so you can see where the Nuremberg paper mill is, right? The lower right corner. And this is in 1493, so like 40 years after Gutenberg. We're definitely seeing a need for mass producing, scaling up paper production in Europe. All right. And of course, there's also one of these videos, which we generally show in class. We're not going to play it right now for you, or at least not the whole thing. But if you've been in class, you are familiar with with the work of this teacher. So if you're interested, you can just Google Gutenberg, Sunday Girl, Blondie, and you're more than welcome to listen to the song. So, all right, so moving on. All right, so if you did not complete one of the two travelers assignments, then you would have read a little bit about Marjorie Kemp, right? So she's kind of one of our other travelers, and I'll throw this Google slide onto Google Classroom, so that you can click these links if you're interested in her. And she has a pretty interesting story. So you're welcome to pause and go ahead and read through this, and learn a little bit more about her. I did take a picture of an excerpt from the Crying Mystic. So this is out of one of I discovered this in one of my primary source books that I have sitting around. So if you want to pause and read, go ahead and pause and read. All right, and here's the next couple of pages. Feel free to pause and read. All right, so and if we're looking for evidence of cross-cultural interaction, so this would be an activity that we do in class, right? So what evidence do you see here in this passage of cross-cultural interaction? So go ahead and so in class we would read through this, and I would ask the students to identify where they see examples of cross-cultural interaction from this passage. So take a minute and pause the video and look for it. And welcome back. So so this is an account from his journey to China, and we can see some examples here. Right, so hopefully we picked up on these. All right, and we gotta just stop this here. And all right, so in class we'll also be looking at the travelers. So we'll kind of look at the travelers, and for the students who are in class, we will be going through examples of cross-cultural interaction that we see from them, and mapping them out and having a look at them. So kind of key takeaways here: Pax Mongolica, increased demand gold from sub-Saharan Africa results in intensification of trade in the Indian Ocean, and we see an intensification of just generally cross-cultural interaction. How does this increased knowledge of cultures impact future events? Right, so you can a hint for contextualization. All right, so if you can kind of see what we're learning about right now, how it might impact the future, then if you're ever asked a question about those future things, then that is a really good thing to contextualize about. And that's that. Okay. All right, so we're gonna leave it off with that, and call it a day. So nothing to submit today if you are watching from home. Right. Oh yeah, and the passages, by the way, I did link those passages in. Let me just kind of show you what they look like. Right. So there's the Zhonghua piece. Right, and I pulled these off from the Big History Project. So it'll give you some background about him. It'll talk about his voyages and what he did on them. It'll map, kind of where he went in those voyages. So traveled across the Indian Ocean world, and you'll see, discuss some of his legacy, and also gives you a nice timeline, of his life. And then you can see the kind of the retraction, the end of that era of the Ming Dynasty. So there's the Zhonghua one, the Ibn Battuta one. Just kind of give you a look at that. Once again, off Big History Project. So background who he is, his travels. It's pretty interesting to read through this. And right? Kind of give you a nice kind of rundown of the different places he went and what he saw. And you can see some of his travels here, and this map is not as complete as the one I showed you earlier, right? And some of the legacy of it, all right? So, and then we get a timeline, right, of his travels as well. Okay, so that's so we'll be kind of mapping that stuff out in class. So it's you do need to know Jungha, you do need to know even Batuta, and kind of and also understand them. As far as Marco Polo, I simply gave this as an optional thing because we did already talk about him in the context of the Yuan dynasty, right, and his role in his accounts from his role in the court of the Yuan and Kublai Kai. All right. So yes, we'll be looking at probably bring this up as well. All right. All right. So that's it. Nothing to submit today, as I had previously said. And let me just kind of make sure that is it there, right? Yeah. All right. So we'll call it a day. All right. So I can kind of pull this up. I lost my screen. That is not it. All right. Can't even shut down my own video. So I'm signing off. If I can find my videos, kind of playing around too much apparently. All right. There it is. Finally found it. Very good. All right. So I'm signing off. Sapriati.